Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:46. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Tom Slater's here as well from SpikedOnline. Got a couple of stories to do regarding the latest from the world of Asylum. And that's not where crazy people are. Of course, it's where people are coming here to try and remain here. And the latest story today, Tom, is in the Telegraph, page 6. Albanian people smugglers are fighting extradition to Belgian jails because the cells apparently are so small and overcrowded they breach their human rights.
This is incredible. It's just one story after another at the moment, isn't it? And it was bad enough when you had sex offenders and members of terrorist groups fighting extradition to their home countries because the fact that, you know, those nations are not so liberal, and if they have run-ins with the police or with the authorities there, it might not end well for them. I don't think that's a reason to keep someone in the country. But at the same time, this is about Belgium. This is not as if we really think they're going to be...
It's not the Congo, is it?
No, like kind of subject to kind of extrajudicial killings and so on if they are sent back.
They're not going to be hanged from a crane in Bruges, are they?
No, exactly. And also the fact that he was involved, he was convicted in absentia for people smuggling. The fact that he's using asylum rules to stop his deportation. It's like they're kind of laughing at us now. And yet, because of the nature of our system and because of the way in which you've got these really quite credulous activist judges who are willing to go along with it, you just get one case like this in the news every day.
But this is the sort of what I guess the Telegraph have found this rich vein of stories from, because all they're obviously doing is going to these immigration panels where these judges are sitting in judgment, who are all clearly signed up to the same kind of human rights bill and the ECHR and all the rest of it. And every single time anybody mentions human rights, they get to stay.
No, absolutely. And it's one of those things where, of course, much of this is about those human rights laws. Much of this is about our membership of the ECHR and the Human Rights Act and all the rest of it. But you can't help but read these and think these are, as much as these show how much the law has gone awry and completely out of whack with what it was intended when this whole kind of human rights interface was set up.
Well, we live in a different... I mean, you mentioned earlier on in the show that, you know, we live in a different world now. I mean, the world has changed irrevocably from the time that the ECHR was conceived, hasn't it?
No, absolutely. And people, we know, start looking into the middle distance to talk about the lessons of the Second World War and Winston Churchill and so on. Do we really think that the architects of our human rights conventions, that who they had in mind when they were drawing that up were kind of Albanian crime lords, paedophiles and terrorists, and fighting for their right to a family life, to stay in the country even though they've abused their own stepchildren? Is that really what we think they had in mind when they were drawing up these rules? Of course it isn't. This isn't about civil liberties and making sure that people aren't subject to horrendous treatment by states and whatever. It's just become a kind of barrier to deporting almost anyone, even those who commit the most heinous crimes that anyone sensible could agree should mean that you should be allowed to stay here.
I mean, it's almost as though now, unless you're a complete and utter idiot, you're staying. I mean, if you can't find a human rights lawyer to find a reason why you can stay, then there's obviously something wrong with you.
No, as soon as that chicken nuggets case came out, I thought anything will go now. Like you can throw anything at the wall in these tribunals and it will stick.
Exactly, because all of these judges are so left-wing that they'll go, oh yeah, of course, he mustn't be able to be sent there. That'd be awful. Imagine that. Another story about Islam at the weekend. An Islamist terrorist who stabbed a man to death in France had somehow managed to avoid deportation 10 times. The suspect, identified as 37-year-old Algerian national Brahim A, shouted Allahu Akbar multiple times during an attack in a market town in the eastern part of France, killing a 69-year-old man who tried to stop the attack. 2 police officers obviously also seriously injured, 3 more wounded as well. And the French Interior Minister accused Algeria of refusing to take the suspect back nearly a dozen times. So they refused to take him back 10 times. I mean, the Donald Trump answer to that would be, OK then, so we're then going to start punishing you as a country and putting sanctions on you and putting tariffs on you, and that would have stopped.
And they could have at least tried something. I mean, the idea that you're in a situation where... I get that it's complicated when you have a state which is refusing to take its people back, or a state that has, you know, fallen to the Taliban in the case of Afghanistan or whatever. But that can't be the end of the conversation, especially in Europe now, where time and again there have been people who have been known to be dangerous, who have been known to be in the particular country illegally, and then the point at which the public find out about them is when they've gone on a stabbing spree in the middle of a park somewhere. It's people aren't going to put up with this anymore, and it's almost like the most pathetic excuse for why this person wasn't dealt with. It's almost a kind of computer says no excuse. We couldn't find a neat way to do it, so
we just gave up. So we just gave up. I mean, that technically seems to be what happens, you know. In the same way in this country, you hear stories of how, you know, individuals weren't deported because the Home Office somehow didn't send anybody to the court hearing, or, you know, the police weren't able to send anybody to the court hearing, or a report went missing, or, you know, there's always some excuse or other which is a sort of bureaucratic one.
Yeah, or the person in question just disappeared from their accommodation for a couple of months.
Yeah.
If it's that easy to evade
but it is.
these authorities, then of course everyone's going to exploit it.
Yeah.
And what's so crazy is when you've got cases like this where the person was not only slated for deportation but is known to be violent, is known to be dangerous.
And this guy was known to be a schizophrenic.
It comes to a certain point where this is a complete abdication of responsibility to the safety of your own citizens as much as it is anything else. And given how often this is happening,
and surely that should be the number. And this is why I think people haven't forgiven Angela Merkel. They haven't forgiven the Germans for allowing 1 million Syrians to come into to Europe all those years ago when suddenly the Syrian war was happening, and people, of course, came in from every single country in the Middle East claiming to be from Syria because she had naively said, if you're coming here from Syria, no questions asked, you'll be able to stay. I
mean, no questions asked is a crazy policy regardless of where someone was coming from, first world, developing world, whatever. It should be obvious to anyone that if you have a complete free-for-all, that yes, the vast majority of people crossing that border will have no ill intent, but at the same time, it's impossible to distinguish between those who do and those who don't. But even if you have that kind of system.
Exactly, but even if they have no ill intent, they'll certainly be clogging up doctors' offices, they'll be clogging up schools, they'll be bringing relatives with them, you know, they'll be clogging up benefits offices. They won't be doing work which is in any way making them, you know, positive contributors to society, because they will be net receivers of benefits, because they'll bring loads of people with them in the end. And so it's not a harmless, you know, even if you're not a terrorist, it's still not a harmless occupation.
Well, you need to make sure the jobs are there for people. I mean, that's one of the reasons that Germany was so, in inverted commas, welcoming, was because of the fact that they know they had a lot of kind of jobs that needed to be plugged and so on. But at the same time, you need to make sure that you've got the resources across society to provide for these people. Similarly, you need to make sure that the public are on board with what it is that you're doing. And that decision was taken over and above the heads of the German people.
The public weren't even asked about it.
How are you going to get actual public buy-in for these policies? The answer to that is because no one was ever going to support this, because a free-for-all on that scale was always going to be fraught with these kinds of problems, not just in terms of security, as you say, but I think that's the primary one people are thinking about, as we've seen one attack after another.
Exactly. Meanwhile, just as a story that goes around the other way, unusually, Peter and Barbie Reynolds on the front page of the Times this morning, who are a British couple in their 70s. They've been arrested by the Taliban, apparently for teaching parenting skills to mothers over 30. They've been there for a very, very long time. They met at Bath University. They got married in Kabul in 1970, apparently, and they've been involved in training projects. I mean, I'm, you know, sure that this will end hopefully well for them, but I wonder what Keir Starmer's going to say about this and whether he's going to fight for them to be released from prison. I haven't seen anything from him yet.
No, we can only hope that he's going to do everything that he can. I mean, it's one of those reminders, I suppose, that whilst you know, they might have been in the country for a very long time, under Taliban 2.0, it's just not a risk that any Western citizen should really take, because of the fact that even if you're doing nothing wrong, you're not dealing with a kind of rule of law, fair day in court kind of regime there. But also, as we've seen in Iran recently, a lot of these governments are quite willing to lock up foreign citizens if they think they might get a bit of leverage out of it as well. So just more reason for people to be particularly careful. Do we think Keir Starmer is going to be the man to do this diplomatic high wire act to get these people home? Probably not.
Or David Lammy, for heaven's sake. I mean, you can't say you can hold up much hope for that, really, can you? Finally, a story on the front page of the Telegraph. Fewer claimants are having their benefits cut after refusing to work, according to official figures. This is despite Labour's pledge to tackle Britain's joblessness crisis and boost employment. Official figures show 117,000 people out of 2.1 million claiming Britain's main unemployment benefit had their payments docked in November 2024, which is down from the previous year. There's so many people claiming benefit in this country who just don't work. I think we had the figure that came out last year, 2.1 million people, basically, and as many as 3 million people who are just basically not even looking for work.
And it's one of those things where, yes, there's kind of individual cases of people who are just really taking the piss. There's always going to taking the mick, I should say. There's always going to be instances of that. I think the problem is that the system is kind of incentivised towards pushing people towards these things now, trapping them within these systems. And you really need a concerted effort to sort that out. I mean, the Labour Party have started to talk a bit more tough about this, but again, it's
But again,
you've got to untangle all of these horrendous incentives that have been set up for people, which almost oftentimes it's not within their best interests to go out and actually get gainful employment, because the fact that they would lose all of the benefits that they've
and that's
built
the thing for an awful lot of people. I mean, you can't really blame them. I mean, it's like some people who say you don't really blame the people who want to come here illegally, because you know, if you want to get a better life and you live in somewhere like Algeria, you know, maybe, you know, West London seems like quite a good option. If you can get here, get yourself a moped and start delivering food to people, you'll be making 10 times what you'd be making at home. You know, same for people like this. You know, if you actually lose money by going to work, why would you? You know, of course you're going to stay on benefits. So they've got to change the system.
No, exactly.
But how many governments,
about it all day, but
how many governments have we heard saying that we're going to completely radicalise it, we're going to completely root and branch reform it, we're going to change it completely, we're going to incentivise people to go back to work? None of which ever happens, and all of which now has brought us to this point we're at, where we've got more people on benefits now and not even attempting to work than ever.
No, exactly. And the problem is that it hasn't suited politicians to deal with it, because of the fact that they could, especially if you're talking about people who are essentially kind of signed off from work, incapacity benefit, various different sorts of illness benefits and so on. It was good for politicians because they could say, oh look, unemployment is actually really low, and they could also then rely on the lever of mass migration to keep GDP figures artificially ticking over and to plug those gaps in the labour market that were created by so many people basically being put out to pasture. So that whole we're talking about the incentives for people who are caught up in the system, also the political incentives of it would almost help, it worked for politicians to just put so many millions of people just out to pasture and pretend like it didn't matter that so many of them weren't working when they could be, because of the fact that it artificially looked good for them in terms of like an ONS data sheet. But that has surely got to stop, not least because it's not just about people, it's also about whole communities now, which are just being kind of left to rot on the vine.
And there's nothing
because
there's
no work.
Because there isn't any work, or they're not qualified even to do the work that there is. But I mean, another story that goes with that, front page of the Telegraph today, worst start for the job market since COVID. The job market suffered the worst start to a year since the depths of the COVID lockdowns in 2021, as employers cut hiring in the face of Rachel Reeves' record tax increases. Another genius move by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, or the Chancellor of the Exchequer as she's now being called. I mean, people are not going to hire you because they're going to have to pay more national insurance. It's a pretty straightforward exchange of money and goods, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone was making this point that it's going to, in effect, be a tax on jobs, because it is. And in a situation in which you've got a government which claims it cares about getting people back into work, you can't help but think, really? At this point. I know. But that budget has unravelled so quickly.
It's absolutely awful, isn't it? Now, I'm going to finish this hour by asking you the question I'm going to ask everybody this week. This is based on Elon Musk's email. Right? He basically says, you will shortly be receiving an email requesting to understand what you got done last week. So, what did you get done last week that can justify your existence?
Oh, well, you know, I've wrote a bunch of articles. There you go. Made some podcasts.
Well, you've done your job.
I think I've done all right.
Yeah,
you know.
It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not an offensive question. You were able to answer it with relative ease. I mean, if you were a civil servant in America, apparently this is so offensive that they're talking about having some kind of mini revolution because they've been asked to justify what it is that they do for the public money that they are paid.
How dare they ask
I know.
Those questions,
imagine if you asked Keir Starmer, what have you got done in the past week? He hasn't really got much done. He's said a lot of stuff, but none of it has made any sense.
Exactly. He's tried his best.
For working people, obviously. Tom, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater.